Hi there, welcome to this morning's IndyCar on Friday, the, what is it, 21st today? Yep, 21st of June. I'm Gordon Ross, and as usual I have three topics for you from recent news. The first one is the way in which climate protesters from Greenpeace, who were actually giving out leaflets during the Mansion House speech by the Tory Chancellor yesterday, how those protesters were manhandled out of the room, and the way in which climate protesters generally are being treated in the UK. Second piece of news today regards recent comments made by Mark Carney, the boss of the Bank of England, about how many UK firms are unprepared for a no-deal Brexit. And the third item today is about why Scotland is big enough, wealthy enough and smart enough to use its own currency from the outset at the beginning of independence, and why it should do that almost immediately. But we'll come back to that subject in a few moments. Okay, so first of all, to the climate protests at the Mansion House speech given by Philip Hammond yesterday, when a group of young women dressed in evening gowns with sashes about the climate emergency wrapped around them started to move around inside the Mansion House diners with leaflets to hand out. This wouldn't have been all that remarkable had it not been for the actions of one Tory minister who leapt from his seat and violently shoved one of these young women against the pillar, and then grabbed her by the neck and frog marched her forcibly out of the room. Now, this overreaction has been all over social media and all over the mainstream media this morning, with calls for this gentleman to be sacked or to resign from his post as a minister. The question in my mind is, why did he overreact so badly? What was it he thought these women were going to do? And why did he react so violently in the first place? Well, I think if you put yourself in the mindset of a Tory minister, Tory ministers are guarded day and night by a force of special police to make sure that they're not harmed by terrorists or activists or people trying to assassinate them. And the Tories, God bless them, they're in their own domain at the Mansion House, all dressed up in their finery at taxpayers' expense with these lavish dinner, thinking they were all safe and sound behind the security net, when all of a sudden a room filled with well-dressed young women in evening gowns giving out leaflets. Now, normally most people's reaction to that would be, one of bemusement and possibly taking a leaflet. But the fact that this guy was so paranoid about it that he leapt on this woman as though she was wearing a suicide vest just shows you how paranoid being a Tory minister, how it makes you paranoid being a Tory minister. Because just the mere mention of the climate emergency seemed to be enough to set this guy off, and off he went as if he was the SAS tackling a terrorist suspect. It could be that he was ex-SAS and this was just an overreaction, but the point I'm trying to make here is that if the same thing were to happen at a dinner in Edinburgh with the First Minister and members of the Parliament, the most likely thing that would have happened was those women or one of their representatives would have been invited up to the podium to explain why they were there and to give the audience the benefit of listening to what their protest was about. And in a civilised democratic society, a government which did that would gain more kudos than one which uses violence to eject basically a small group of young women carrying nothing but leaflets and wearing evening gowns. It's not as if they were wearing suicide vests and carrying Kalashnikovs and grenades. So I think it just outlines the difference between the way the Tories are basically how they are seen by the electorate, but also how the Tories imagine they are so unpopular and so hated that they would jump on anybody who even hands out a leaflet at one of their events. So massive overreaction, probably caused by the fact that the Tories are paranoid about being assassinated because they're so desperately unpopular. Okay, let's move on to the Bank of England and its director, Mark Carney. And his comments recently, I think, made not exactly contemporaneously. These are comments that were attributed to him a while ago, and I think he's reiterated these comments recently. But he has intervened and has been quoted in the mainstream newspapers as saying that 150,000 United Kingdom firms are completely unprepared for a no-deal Brexit. And by that he meant that they had stockpiled perhaps in the past for a no-deal Brexit on the 29th of March, but those stockpiles have now depleted, and the companies are now in a vulnerable position where if there is a no-deal on the 31st of October, there will suddenly be taxes imposed on everything that they export. And they're not ready for that. They don't have the necessary paperwork to fill out ready in time to actually deal with the massive bureaucracy that will be involved in a no-deal Brexit, because suddenly there will be a lot of new customs rules. The World Trade Organization rules, which are so much talked about by Brexiters, exiting on WTO terms, as they put it. Now, the World Trade Organization terms apply if you're in the World Trade Organization. Britain isn't in the World Trade Organization. The UK isn't in the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization exists for those who are not in trade deals with other countries and who are not members of the European Union or other trading blocs. We, unfortunately, would probably not be admitted to the World Trade Organization simply because the United Kingdom has irritated, annoyed or insulted lots of members of the World Trade Organization, people who really would be doing us a favour and trying to help us with the WTO if they hadn't been snubbed or ignored or upset or insulted by the UK at some point. So if there is definitely going to be a no-deal Brexit, it looks that way. It looks like there's not really any hope now of them stopping no deal, because the legislation which would have prevented no deal and where Parliament would have been able to take control of the process has been lost. And there is nothing at the moment on the statute books that would prevent Boris Johnson simply taking us out of the European Union or allowing us to come out of the European Union with nothing. There was a claim made by Boris Johnson that an obscure clause in European Union law would allow for, I think it was a 10-year period, a suspension. In other words, keeping the rules and regulations of excuse me, oh, it's got a call coming in on my screen there, I'll answer it in a minute. Sorry, a 10-year suspension, which means that, according to Boris Johnson and his team, that he could ask the European Union to basically suspend the UK's conditions and terms so that we continue to trade even though we've fallen out without a deal. Except, then this is the problem, that as Mark Carney has pointed out, this particular clause only exists if there is a deal on the table. If you're in the middle of negotiating a deal with the EU, then that clause can apply. If you are leaving the EU with a deal. If you're leaving the EU without a deal, the clause doesn't apply. So again, usually the normal thing with Boris Johnson, he paps out something as a fact that turns out to be false. And in this case, this is false. So finally today we come to the third item on today's programme, which is, I think the term we used to use for this is a brain drain. The brain drain was something which in the 60s and 70s was a term used to describe the fact that Scotland at that time did not have jobs for high achievers, young graduates coming out of Scottish universities, scientists, people with great, what should we say, great skills and learning and qualifications were having to leave Scotland to find jobs, and that meant that the best young talent that we had was effectively emigrating to try and find work, usually in England or in London. This has led to Scotland being almost unique in Europe in having a contracting population, a population that has constantly decreased over time. It has very recently started to grow a little bit, and now it's starting to contract again. And again, the reason for this is lack of opportunities here in Scotland. Ian Blackford, the leader of the SNP group at Westminster, was giving his speech yesterday afternoon in his home territory of Skye. And what he was saying there was that the Scottish economy has, well, not the Scottish economy, the Scottish population has been the only population in Europe that's been contracting since World War II. And the reason for it is the paucity, the lack of opportunities for highly skilled and highly educated young people who leave our universities. And that, he says, has to change. And to this end, the SNP is launching a new campaign. And the campaign will be about being big enough, wealthy enough and smart enough now to stop that brain drain, to actually put the plug in the plug hole and to keep that talent in the Scottish labour pool, because we will have a new industrial base which is based on green technologies, which by their very nature are developed by scientists and engineers. And scientists and engineers are the very types of individuals who have been migrating away from Scotland to England and other places where there were no jobs here, mostly down to policies of London-based government. Now, that leads me to one final thing, and that is the currency. Now, the currency issue, you'll remember a few months ago the SNP announced that there would be a Scottish currency, but they intended to hang on to the use of sterling in the first few years of a new independent Scottish state. The problem with that is that Brexit changes that equation completely. If Brexit hadn't happened, that would work because the pound would be relatively stable. But if you add Brexit into this equation, Brexit means that if there is a no deal, that the value of the pound sterling will drop off a cliff edge immediately following a no deal Brexit. So let's assume for a moment that happened on the 31st of October. The pound would drop in its current value from about $1.25 to goodness knows what, but it certainly would plunge. We are talking more than 10% here. According to calculations from the British government's own reports and its own research, in a no-deal Brexit situation, the economy of the United Kingdom would contract up to 9%. Now, to put that in context, the world global banking crisis of 2008, which we all still remember because we still haven't recovered from that, that was just a contraction of the UK economy by 2%. So you multiply that by 3 and add 1, that's what a no-deal Brexit will do to the British economy. Now, if you can think back that it's been 11 years since the 2008 banking crisis, and we are still suffering from austerity in the UK. Imagine that times 3 and a bit. That's what a no-deal Brexit will do. So having our currency being the UK pound would be a colossal mistake, because that currency would be worth buttons. You could probably paper your walls with £20 notes. So we need our own Scottish currency, and the Scottish pound could be used from day one as our domestic currency. In other words, the money that we use every day in the shops could be the Scottish pound, and it could be preserved at its existing sterling value before Brexit happened. And that would mean that our currency would be entirely stable within the Scottish context. We would still have pounds, they would still be worth what they are now, and we'd still be able to use them anywhere in Scotland. But as soon as we tried to go over the border into England, our currency would suddenly be worth a lot more, because the English pound would be worth so little. And that would give us a trading advantage over England. Anything that was imported from England would cost us less. Anything Scotland exported into England would cost them a lot more. If we all used the same currency, then currency would go down in value and Scotland would suffer as a result. Now, what currency we use is certainly one thing, but the currency that we use to trade with other countries is a completely different matter, because for one thing, we need to trade in things like electricity and gas, oil, and other sort of consumables, we say, in things like price and food. All these things need to be sold abroad, but not in a currency which is going to fall off the edge of a cliff. So for Scotland to continue to trade with Europe, we would probably do all our foreign deals in Europe with the euro. In other words, we would price in euros and we would charge euros for whatever we export. And that foreign currency would then come back into the Scottish Central Bank and form a pot of gold, a treasury. In America, if we were selling, let's say we were selling oil or gas to North America or Canada, or just selling oil anywhere actually, we would probably use the dollar, because the dollar is a tradable currency all over the world, and its value is relatively stable. And whatever we sold in dollars would give us dollars in our own treasury, and that also adds up to more money because these currencies are stable and worth more. English pounds, they would be a problem. The pound sterling is going to be a problem no matter what happens. If we Brexit and leave the UK, and the UK leaves if we exit the UK and the UK exits the EU, then the English pound is going to plunge. And this is just a fact. This is just the way the world works. It's the way capitalism works. It's the way money works. Money is only worth whatever collateral you have in the bank. So if you have a wealthy economy that's making a lot of money from overseas trade, and you've got a big reserve of foreign currency in your central bank, then your currency is going to be stable. So let's say we use the dollar and we use the euro for a few years to trade while Scotland gets itself established. After that, who knows? I mean, we could just continue like that, have our Scottish pound internally, trade with Europe in euros, trade with the rest of the world in dollars, everybody's happy. But using the pound, nah, would be a big mistake. So we are big enough, we are wealthy enough, and we're definitely smart enough to stop the brain drain. Scotland with a new green industrial base will have tens of thousands of new high technology jobs, perfect for the smart young people coming out of our universities with doctorates and degrees in engineering and sciences and other things as well. Can stay here, won't have to emigrate to find a good job that pays the bills anymore. And finally, Scotland will hopefully have a stable population, and that will mean that we won't need to attract as many overseas immigrants as we do now. At the moment, we're having to rely on immigration to fill the gap in our own job market with people who have the skills that we need, because all of our other smart young people from university have emigrated elsewhere to make bigger money in the south and in London. So a lot of things will change after independence, and we need to think forwards. And I think my analysis is we need to have a Scottish pound as a domestic currency straight away, right from the beginning, so that daily life in Scotland and the business of commerce in Scotland is relatively unaffected. Trading across the border with England with a collapsing pound is going to be difficult. It's not insurmountable, but it's not our problem. Let's put it that way. We haven't created the plunging pound because we haven't wanted to do a no-deal Brexit. And in fact, if we leave the UK and don't Brexit, we are inside the European Union, able to trade with Ireland. And if Northern Ireland also pulls out of the UK, we'll be able to trade with Northern Ireland as well. So the only people really in trouble will be England and Wales. And the only reason they're in trouble is because they have, in a small majority, voted for Brexit. And that would be up to them to kick out the politicians and the people who caused Brexit, not up to us. We haven't caused this. English voters have allowed themselves to be led to Brexit by people who've lied to them, and by people like Nigel Farage, who's being financed by Donald Trump's own backer, by Steve Bannon, who has been pumping millions of dollars into Vote Leave and is pumping millions of dollars into the Brexit party that Nigel Farage now runs. There is a fear at the moment that if Boris Johnson becomes Prime Minister, which looks likely, that somehow or other he will be able to elevate Nigel Farage with a peerage, make him Lord Nigel Farage of somewhere or other, and then once he's done that, he can then be offered a job as a minister in a Brexit government of some kind. Now, can you imagine Nigel Farage as some kind of minister in a government? He could end up with a lot more power than you think. However, that's not, as I say, going to be our problem, because we won't be Brexiting with England and won't have to put up with it. But as I say, our currency will need to be established right at the beginning, and it needs to be adopted right at the beginning, because Brexit, as I say, changes the whole dynamics of having a currency, simply because Brexit will wreck the UK's currency, and we need to protect ourselves against that eventuality. Mark Carney is concerned that the UK is going to plunge out without a deal, and 150,000 firms in the UK are not ready for it, and there is no protection. And what Boris Johnson has been claiming about this obscure article in the European Union's laws about suspending our terms and conditions for 10 years while we sort ourselves out, that is a lie. That's a massive a massive misinterpretation of the law, which Carney says only applies if you are negotiating a deal with the EU, not if you exit with no deal. That's it for today. I'll see you all probably on Sunday, and look forward to hopefully returning back to Scotland at 7 next Thursday. But for now, I'll just say goodbye, and I'll see you all on Sunday. Have a great weekend. Bye bye.